Well, we have a lot to unpack here, and we look forward to having a very open discussion in the time we have remaining together. Postmaster General DeJoy, as we have heard, and you mentioned and others have heard, the Postal Service made a number of changes in two very large facilities in Richmond, Virginia, as well as Atlanta, Georgia. Unfortunately, that implementation, as we heard from Ms. Hall, has caused some problems and service disruptions during that time. I have the chart here for folks who are in the audience. One-time service declined after the Postal Service implemented changes in Richmond, and unfortunately is still unreliable, as you can see from the chart here. Atlanta is particularly problematic, where we saw service plummet. In fact, inbound first-class mail has dropped to only 36% on time, 36% on time. In addition, cost savings have not been realized. Estimated the Richmond facility, for example, incurred about $8 million in unexpected cost as a result of some of these changes. So my question for you, sir, is given these service delays and increased cost, is the Postal Service still moving forward with these planned network changes? And you think it's prudent now to perhaps try to evaluate exactly what happened in these two locations to make any changes that may be necessary before you continue to roll it out on a nationwide basis?
Yes, first of all, you're correct in regards to the service deteriorating. We recognize that. We apologize to the constituents that have received that service. But in the long term, if we don't make these changes, that will be every day, everywhere around the nation. The problems that we are having with regard to both facilities being open have nothing to do with the fact that we want to process packages with a conveyor rather than by hand, that we want to fill trucks and have it run 90% full instead of 30% full. It has nothing to do with how we want to make one trip 300 miles away to pick up no mail versus 2 trips a day to pick up no mail, and a host of other operational and strategic initiatives that we have in the plan that enable us to compete with private industry, because that's the law that you all have us operating under. To the extent of the problems that manifested, this is an organization that has not engaged in change in over 15 years, right? We are taking longstanding broken practices and a less than engaged management style and trying to transition from losing $137 billion over the last 15 years to competing with a FedEx or UPS, to operate like a FedEx or UPS. The issues that we had here were, in fact, management issues on the ground, were, in fact, employee attendance issues, were, in fact, basic management tactics that now that the organization is engaged, I am quite confident, I see it. I see the whole team getting better, understanding the transition that we have to make, committing more to the transition that we have to make. And I say, sir, we don't have another choice but to carry on. It is a good plan. It's a simple plan, right? We have $20 billion worth of deferred maintenance. That's what we're fixing.
Postmaster General, if I just, I understand that change is very hard, especially in a very large organization. It's incredibly difficult. The point that I'm making is that we look at these two facilities with the changes that you've made that have had disruptions and problems. You said that's going to happen throughout the system in the long term, yet we're not seeing that currently in these others. We're seeing these two particular facilities with these changes are having this kind of impact. I'm not against change. You and I have had that discussion before. Change is good, but if you're starting to see that kind of impact with these changes at these two facilities, is it time just to pause a little bit and say, okay, what do we need to tweak? What do we need to change? That's not going to result in this. I'm not going to bury my head in the sand and say, you got to stay in the status quo. We know that's not working.
I understand what you're asking me now. And sir, we have paused, we have changed, we have reorganized, we have committed additional resources. I have taken my foot on and off the pedal as appropriate to capitalize on the momentum that we have in making a change, the time period that we have before we run out of cash, but recognizing some of the weaknesses that we have in deploying. And I'm very sensitive to that and have stopped many initiatives. There were a few more plans supposed to roll out this year, but also within the organization, some of the local things. These plants will succeed. We're 3 months, 4 months into Atlanta. We moved almost 2,000 people from 10 locations around the city into one, right? You know, we went from processing packages by hand to doing 1 million a night, right? Richmond, I had a conversation with the OIG last week. She went to Richmond. There's a different attitude within the organization there in terms of learning how to process using, in a refurbished plant, using the proper tools, using the proper instruction. That was void. That is part of what we're trying to rebuild here. Engagement with our workforce, standard management practices. But we're not doing this blindly with an intent to destroy service.
No, and I would never imply that, but I would say, so I want to just say, I heard you say that you are slowing things down. You are taking a look to see, as those numbers improve, could we have transparency? As those numbers improve, which you contend will happen with your changes in both Richmond and Atlanta, until we see that, you're slowing down the implementation around the country? Is that an accurate
Well, I would not
restatement?
have construction underway. I am mindful of the transition to avoid circumstances like that, and that's how I will deploy myself. Those two plants, Richmond and Atlanta, and the whole Georgia area, will be the finest running parts of the organization very shortly, all right? And we have to allow time to transition. There are consequences. I did not create this problem that exists or this trajectory that exists there, but we have to move out, and we're very, very mindful of this, and we'll
I appreciate
put every
that.
effort to stop that from happening.
Great, thank you, thank you. The Postal Service recently made another change that's causing issues, and that's the local transportation optimization. Inspector General Hall, you mentioned that in your opening comments, and the change was implemented in Richmond, which the Postmaster General mentioned, but your office published a report yesterday, which you referenced as well, showing it contributed service declines there. Briefly, because I'm running out of time, does this change have concerns for you, particularly in rural areas, which are tends to be folks that are most vulnerable to these kinds of changes?
Yes, we did issue the report yesterday. We found that when the Postal Service implemented this in October, that service declined by 21 percentage points, and the majority of the zip codes that were impacted by this local transportation optimization, the vast majority were in rural areas. So we have some concerns. We'll be continuing to look at that, but right now that was the first one that had been implemented, and we saw that the service decline was most significant in those rural areas.
So I'm going to get back to the rural. You've heard a lot about rural places from my colleagues here, and we're certainly seeing changes that are impacting us in Michigan, particularly in the Upper Peninsula, which is about as rural as you can get. And folks up there, just like they do all over the country, rely on timely delivery for the mail. One particularly important thing that's occurring right now in the UP is testing drinking water for bacterial contamination, and that requires one-day delivery. When you take those samples and send it off to the lab, it has to get there in an incredibly timely way for it to be a valid test. That has become an issue for us in the Upper Peninsula. We also know, as all of you know, veterans need access to their medication. They get that primarily from mail service, and that's has to be a continued focus for the Postal Service to make sure that those meds are getting to our veterans on time. We had a hearing that the Postal Service had because of some changes in the UP, and actually postal officials were unaware that we had a VA facility in the Upper Peninsula, which was somewhat striking that they would not be aware. The VA facility is incredibly important to veterans who live in the Upper Peninsula. Postmaster General DeJoy, I know that the Postal Service has not announced a number of changes to the transportation policy at several locations, but we found out recently it was being implemented in Michigan. So my question for you is why weren't communities notified before these changes, before they're rolling out? Why isn't there more transparency so that they know what's happening?
So
You pull your microphone closer too, please.
yeah. We make a lot of different transportation changes. I'm trying to think about which, if you're talking about the one-day issue or just a local transportation optimization.
Local, part of the network changes.
Yeah, because it's not intended to have any difference in service standards, right? We run too many trucks with no mail in it all over the country, and the whole process is to try and optimize that so we can cut our costs. I have to get $1.5 billion out of local transportation. The intention of all these initiatives when these items are rolled out are not to have a consequence, right, within the standards. The standards are, 2 to 5 days, and we're delivering 60% of the mail and packages across the country a day in advance, right? So we're trying to take advantage of that cushion that has been built in to make sure that we can optimize our freight. So we did not think, we didn't change collection box times, we didn't change anything. The mail sits in the system from the time we get it, somewhere in the postal system across the country, whether it's, so that is the essence of the change. It wasn't expected to have an impact. And I don't think in the Upper Peninsula we've had much of an impact on service. So my last check was that, for the most part, everything was running pretty smoothly.
Yeah, obviously, folks will bring issues up. We look at data. I look at data as well.
Yeah.
And one data point that I think is something we have to be really focused on, because there's a great deal of concern of people in the Upper Peninsula, similar to what you heard from my colleague from Nevada, is that the Postal Service, is my understanding, is considering a facility change. That would mean local mail going to and from UP residents, but going out of state into Wisconsin instead of the facility that you have in the Upper Peninsula. We think that's going to likely slow mail. So, but my question for you is, are you measuring the impact of these changes
Yeah,
on rural service so that we can roll it back if it's having that impact because of folks?
Senator, we all look at, the whole organization looks at service. I've instituted new quality programs across the organization and so forth. Our intentions are to make the service on all these moves, and in fact, it is doable with the proper execution of the strategy. With regard to that particular move, as I said, it's not being dismissive of 10% of the people. It's all of that, and the other 90% has to get to a central point to be collated to go across the country. I can't collate these collations that are done at every one of these little locations to get 10% of the mail out, to go back, adds another step when we get to the location, reduces the density of trays, increases the underutilization of our trucks. This mail should make it wherever we send it to. I don't know exactly where this is going, but it's full intention to come in, to schedule, to do outgoing processing on it, postmark it, cancel it, and turn it around the next morning, get back. We have a 2-day standard to get back. All of this is planned out to work. There are lots of issues in execution that will be, that the team is learning how to make these types of changes. They have not been under the pressure to perform at a level that we need to, and using the new equipment and perform to a schedule and make these changes. But I'm confident we will get there, and I'll take a special eye on all of these small moves. As they're not as consequential as some of the bigger things we did in Richmond and Atlanta. These are just taking the outgoing mail, routing the trucks to consolidating, routing to a different plant, and putting it through the normal process. People are already in place, turning it around and sending it back down on the trucks. So we think this is going to be, not consequential in the deployment. And I'm not going to.
I hope so. I mean, what we're seeing though in Richmond, Atlanta, for very obvious reasons, is a red flag for us.
Yeah.
And again, I'm coming to you not as someone against change, because you have to change and you have to become more efficient. But change also creates challenges as to actually the implementation. Mr. Kubayanda, you talked about the advisory opinions that the commission has, to just kind of take a little bit of a pause, to take a look at and talk to stakeholders around. I think, what are your concerns specifically? Could the commission do one of these advisory opinions, and what do you think we would learn from that?
Yes, Senator. I believe an advisory opinion is very valuable and is merited at this time as the Postal Service ramps up this rollout of DFA with the RPDCs and also the optimized collection. I think combined, those are creating what's likely to be a nationwide impact on service, and we do think an advisory opinion is appropriate. As I mentioned in previous advisory opinions in 2021 and 2022, the Commission identified a number of concerns as the Postal Service started to implement some changes. Those concerns included overly optimistic estimates about cost savings, lack of communication with stakeholders, potential impact on rural constituents, potential impact on veterans, and others receiving medications through the mail. All these have come to fruition. We've seen this in the data. We've seen this in the constituent complaints. We've seen this in the Inspector General's recent reports. So I think that advisory opinion process has a lot of value, and we believe that the advisory opinion would be timely right now.
So Postmaster General DeJoy, when I, in my original round of questions and raised the concerns, and you came back and said, no, we're willing to slow things down to make sure that it's all operating correctly, because you're success focused. I've grown to know you over the months here. It seems as if an advisory opinion, slow down, have an advisory opinion to kind of take a look at this while you're continuing to work on making sure that both Richmond and Atlanta are performing. That's going to be your end of the argument. That's the drop the mic moment when Richmond and Atlanta are performing better. They're coming in below cost. The mail delivery services are still there. While you're doing that, also taking a broader look at the impact. Would you be open to this advisory opinion? Is this something that would give you a fresh set of eyes?
I want to discuss with council, but we're in the process of considering an advisory opinion with regard to things that we feel are magnanimous changes to the male community, okay, and are working through what, in fact, we would ask an advisory opinion for, okay, and it's a broad things to try and baseline what our, so that's what we're working through right now. Right, and have been working through over the last six or 8 weeks. But Senator, I just what we're doing.
Before I'll give you time to answer that. But so, what kind of timeline do you think that'll? You've been doing it for 6 weeks now. When would that determination? What would the context be?
It could be. I would have to take it to the board. It could be this board meeting, or it could be a special board meeting afterwards. Is what we would.
Well, it'd be great if it could be this upcoming one and show the urgency.
We're working on it. We have to figure out what, exactly it is that we want, because I don't want to do this again. I kind of have a good understanding of what the infrastructure looks like. I don't understand what issues are not making this connect, and we still plan to deploy a very good service. But let me just, if I can.
Yes, you can finish.
Opening up a facility within 5 miles of 10 facilities, okay, and putting the right equipment and tools and amenities in it. There's nothing, that's what we're doing across the country. There's nothing magnanimous about that, right? Our inability to execute comes from a long period of time of not executing change in a construction matter, and those types of issues, right? How to load a truck, when to load a truck, trucks running late. All of that have been issues within the Postal Service that we've been working to change since since I got here, and we're making progress on that. So it's important to recognize that the strategy is pretty straightforward. Right? We're not, I'm in fact investing in more facilities. I'm opening old facilities that were closed to bring different services with the sorting and delivery centers closer to the communities. We're adding capacity, right? We're teaching our people and so forth. But the pace that we need to change, because we can do all these things, I could avoid those critiques, all these critiques like everyone before me did, right? And we'll continue down the spiral, to where everything is much, much worse and much, much broader than what it is today. Okay? So,
Yeah.
But that is what there's nothing with regard to the plan. It has to do with our execution of it, and we are working on that, and that will, will get better. But this is where we are on the 360. And
again, I'm all about data, and I'm all about how changes need to be made. and execution has to be there. So this is a really complex situation. I know you walked into this as well. But you are a data person as well, as I've gotten to know you, that we want to look at the data. The data does not look great in Richmond. It looks really terrible in Atlanta. You can change that narrative pretty dramatically by showing those numbers are changing. And I think you could agree that a lot of folks get nervous when you see those kinds of numbers and you're like, why are we going to continue to roll this out? That's not saying it can't work. It may very well work, but you just need to demonstrate that. And when you demonstrate that, people will get on board, and that'll be a great thing. But we're just saying, let's step back a little bit, keep working on Richmond and Atlanta. That's going to take time to get that implementation down. You're going to learn a whole lot of lessons. I'm sure that happened in you were very successful in the private sector. You did that as well. You didn't want to disrupt your customers. You would take time to be able to figure that out. Having an advisory opinion coming in as well, taking it from a holistic standpoint, just creates more transparency, which builds more trust, because this is about trust. That's the biggest part of it. I look forward to seeing what you put forward on the advisory committee. I think that's very, very, very positive.
But just to be clear, we have been answering from the chairman dozens and dozens of questions. Every week, we get questions from the Postal Regulatory Commission about what it is we're doing, where every post office is in the country, and other types of things. And we've been submitting information, and the PRC as well. I've briefed the PRC quarterly, right, and with regard to what we're doing. So that it's not that would, and I can't think of how to be more transparent. I speak everywhere. We brief people. We have union meetings. We speak to everybody, all the groups that we can before we do these things. But yes, we will keep you posted as to. I'll let you know when we in fact decide what we're going to do.
Well, I appreciate your desire to be transparent, so I'm going to make some requests here. In my letters to the Postal Service about your plans, I have asked for several specific sets of information, and we have not received full answers. Specifically, I would like the Postal Service to provide the committee, one, a list of locations the Postal Service plans to change with specific timelines for implementation, meaning when do you actually intend to make those changes on the ground at these places. Two, full service data on every location implemented so far, and that means data for every type of facility before and after implementation. And three, documentation for any cost projections, impact studies that the Postal Service has conducted. That's just data. You must be looking at this. This is stuff, obviously, you're looking at too, I would assume, in your due diligence. We would like to have that from the committee as well. Would you commit to providing that information to the committee by May 1st?
I don't know. Let me get back to the office, sir, and I'll have Peter get in touch with Annika, and we'll give you a date on that.
Is that something you think is doable?
May 1st?
May 1st? You should have this information, I suspect, already.
Yeah, so let me just explain one thing about cost data, right? To drive cost out of the system, we need the system.
Well, you have projections, though. I don't disagree, you need a system. But you have, when you make those changes, you're clearly projecting, just like in private industry, you're going to project profit, you're going to project costs.
I sent you a letter telling you what I'm trying to get, $5.5 billion out of the system. Right?
Well, we'd like to have those impact studies. We'll work with your team to try to do that May 1st. That would be important. And obviously, the other piece of all this, Chairman Martinez, in your oversight function and the Board of Governors as well, and I'll just end with this kind of question and thought here. Election mail obviously is a very delicate operation for the Postal Service. You've heard some of my colleagues talk about it, and it requires a lot of coordination. My question for you, sir, is before you allow the Postal Service to move forward with some of these changes, are you willing to stop and consider or reconsider potential impacts on election mail if you believe that that is a risk? And will you be very open and transparent about that process to make sure that we can count on election mail getting there in a timely way, which is essential for our democracy?
Senator, our duty of care is basically to stay informed as we do as a board and to provide oversight. We have been very strong on making sure that elections work very smoothly. and on time. In August of 2020, when there was a lot of criticism about whether that would happen in November of 2020, the board established a special committee, an election mail committee that was at the time headed by Governor Moak, to make sure that everything would work and was coordinated with management to make it sure that the election worked smoothly, and it did. After I became chair, we made the special committee permanent, and now it's a standing committee of the board, and that's chaired by Governor McReynolds, who's an expert on election matters. She meets regularly with management. There's a special task force in management dedicated to election mail performance. So we will be on top of this. We don't want to come back here in January or February, although my term expires in December, and face you and say, hey, it didn't work. You can be assured that we're going to be on top of it. I cannot make assurances ahead of time of what we would do or not do, because it would be, frankly, non-prudent.